Amara Green stood at the tall glass window of the conference room on the 39th floor. The city below buzzed and blinked in the morning light, but her eyes weren't on the skyline. Her focus was inside on the room that held names, power, and expectations. She slowly inhaled, adjusted her dark navy blazer, and walked toward the long boardroom table. Most of the chairs were already filled. Almost all of them. Men. Suits. Laughter. Polished watches. Confident voices. She had been in rooms like this many times before, but today felt different. Because today, she wasn't just visiting. She wasn't invited by a manager or taking notes for someone else. Today she owned the chair at the head of the table. From tired floors to the top floor, Amara wasn't born into success. Her mother was a school teacher. Her father worked 2 jobs. She grew up learning how to make the most of little and how to speak with her eyes before her mouth. Hard work. Quiet strength. Unshakable dignity. She had joined Thomson Elroy Technologies at 26 as a systems analyst. Back then, her name wasn't called in meetings. But her ideas were noticed. Her reports found their way into the hands of directors. Some of them used her insights without crediting her. She never blamed. She simply built more. And better. Years passed. Titles changed. And finally, at 43, Amara became the first black woman CEO the company ever had. It wasn't given. It was earned. The meeting that would make headlines. Everyone knew this day was important. A major merger, one of the biggest in recent years, was about to be discussed. Big companies. Bigger egos. The Global Innovation Alliance was holding a joint summit, and Amara was leading her company's side of the table for the first time. She walked in exactly on time. Silence fell for a brief moment as eyes turned toward her. Some smiled politely. A few nodded. Most just stared. And then, from the corner of the room, one man spoke. His name was Gerald Marks, CEO of a competing firm, Traconet Systems. Tall, wealthy, overconfident. Known for blending ignorance with charm. He sipped his coffee slowly, looked at Amara from head to toe, and with a small laugh said, "Did someone from HR get lost in here?" The room froze. A few laughed, not real laughs, but those awkward, forced laughs people do when they don't want to take a side. Amara paused. She looked directly at Gerald. No smile. No frown. Just calm. "No," she replied. She walked to the head of the table, opened her folder, adjusted the mic, and said, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Let us begin." The room missed what just happened. What the room didn't understand was this: Amara didn't need to prove her place by raising her voice. She had spent 15 years preparing for that table. She knew every detail about the merger, figures, forecasts, flaws. She had read the documents 3 times. She found 2 loopholes in Traconet's proposed deal during her personal weekend review. She noticed things no one else saw. Quietly. Accurately. While others lifted themselves with praise, she lifted herself with preparation. And Gerald? He had no idea what was coming. Power doesn't always wear a loud suit. Amara's assistant, Rena, stood outside the room with a laptop. She watched through the glass wall and smiled to herself. She had seen Amara stay up until midnight going over numbers, building strategy, coaching team leads, and writing notes by hand. People always mistook Amara's calmness for passiveness. But Rena knew better. "She talks slow, but she hits hard," Rena once said to a fellow colleague. She spoke softly, and the floor listened. An hour into the meeting, Amara laid down facts no one could argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just presented truth like stone solid, unmoved, undeniable. Several executives began nodding. Even those who had never spoken to her directly had started writing down her points. Except Gerald. He remained quiet now. Because he was realizing he was standing on thin ice. And Amara was the one holding the map. She didn't belong because of her skin. She didn't belong because of her title. She belonged, because she had built the ground everyone else was standing on. And soon, the man who laughed at her would be the one, no longer laughing at all. As the meeting progressed, something in the room started shifting slowly, but clearly. What began as casual glances and quiet side conversations was now turning into a room full of growing attention and one woman at the center of it all. Amara Green, still as calm and collected as when she entered, was no longer the newcomer in the room. She had their attention not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it, one well-placed fact, one sharp observation at a time. Her voice didn't rise. Her hands didn't move wildly. But when she spoke, the room went still. She didn't waste words, she placed them like chess pieces, precise and strategic. Amara outlined her company's position on the proposed merger with clarity, supported not only by data but by vision. Her strategy focused on long-term partnership, shared innovation, and smart integration. While the other CEOs talked profit and shares, Amara talked about people, sustainability, and customer value without ever losing the strong business foundation beneath her ideas. Executives from neutral firms began nodding. One CEO even whispered to his advisor, "We might be backing the wrong side." Even those who were unfamiliar with Amara before this meeting realized she knew this game better than most. She had come prepared, not just to defend her position, but to offer a better future. But across the table, Gerald Marx was growing visibly uncomfortable. His usually steady voice now wavered slightly. He stumbled over a statistic. His assistant passed him a note, which he skimmed quickly with a frown. What Gerald didn't know was that Amara had spent her entire weekend rereading all the documents related to the merger. And in that process, she had found something buried deep in the legal jargon, a clause that would have forced her company into giving up rights to their newly patented AI software, secretly transferring control to Gerald's firm within 5 years. It was complicated, hard to spot, and written in a way that most executives wouldn't fully understand unless they had legal experience. But Amara had seen it all before. She had once worked in the legal department during her early career. She knew how to read beyond words. And now, as she gently turned to page 74 of the presentation packet and asked, "Before we vote, could we revisit the restructuring clause on this page?" the shift was complete. The legal advisor representing neutral parties flipped through the document, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "Wait, why wasn't this section reviewed earlier?" another VP asked. Amara didn't accuse. She didn't embarrass anyone. She simply pointed to a highlighted sentence and asked, "Can someone explain what this transfer of control would mean 5 years from now?" Gerald tried to jump in. "It's just standard practice," he said, followed by an awkward chuckle. But now no one was laughing. One executive raised her eyebrows. Another sat back, arms crossed. The previously quiet corners of the room became active with murmurs, whispers turning into questions. Someone from the advisory board leaned forward, looking directly at Gerald. "Was this clause approved by your legal team?" he asked. Gerald wiped his forehead and gave a weak yes. But damage was already done. Amara closed her file slowly and leaned back in her chair, not smugly, but with strength. Her eyes looked across the room, not daring anyone to speak, but inviting truth into the space. And truth had arrived, with her. The ones who had thought of her as a symbol suddenly saw the substance. The ones who thought she was a first-time name on some diversity list now realized she was the very mind steering innovation in the industry. What made this moment more powerful was what Amara didn't do. She didn't gloat. She didn't stare Gerald down. She didn't make a speech. She just waited with the same grace that had carried her through every door she had once been told was not for her. Her silence was not weakness. It was strength holding its breath. By the time the lunchtime adjournment was called, Gerald's team had backed away from the original proposal. Amendments were suggested to remove the hidden clause. Two of his closest allies asked for an independent review of his company's recent mergers. And Gerald? He left the room without finishing his coffee. Amara stayed behind to answer a few respectful questions from other CEOs. They no longer saw her as the new face in the room, they now saw her as the woman who saved a billion-dollar company from signing away its future. What Gerald tried to dismiss with a joke, Amara corrected with quiet intelligence. And what started with a disrespectful comment, "You don't belong here," was now being rewritten by every respectful nod, every compliment, every business card quietly slipped into her folder. And she still hadn't made her boldest move yet. The next morning, the corporate world woke up to headlines they didn't expect. New CEO saves merger from hidden contract loophole. Bold leadership by Amara Green puts rivals on notice. Is Traconet Systems hiding more? For those in the room, the story was clear. Amara Green hadn't embarrassed anyone, she'd simply asked the smartest question at the smartest time. But the wave it created was far greater than anyone expected, especially for Gerald Marks. Calls poured into his office. Investors wanted explanations. His board wanted details. Employees wanted answers. Internally, documents were being reviewed again. Now people were paying close attention to all of Gerald's past mergers and partnerships. Legal teams started catching patterns. Too many clever clauses. Too many quiet shifts in control. Too much gain for him. Too much loss for others. At first, Gerald tried brushing it off as business talk. But this time, no one was laughing with him. Behind closed doors back at Thomson Elroy, Amara sat in her corner office not to celebrate, but to plan. She never let headlines distract her from the mission, building a business that was true, transparent, and strong enough to carry others with her. Still, part of her knew something bigger was starting. Her assistant, Rena, walked in holding a press release from a smaller firm. "It looks like Gerald's board called an emergency meeting," she said. Privately. Amara simply nodded. She wasn't surprised. She had worked too hard for too long not to recognize the signs. Some things don't fall. They unravel. And Gerald had started to come loose in the threads. But Amara didn't gloat. That wasn't her way. Instead, she used the attention to create space, not shine her own spotlight, but open the curtain for others who had stood in the back too long. Lifting as she climbs, the same week the headlines ran, Amara made a quiet move behind the scenes. She launched a new leadership mentorship program within her company, aimed at lifting underrepresented talent into senior positions. Engineers, analysts, project leads, all from backgrounds that rarely saw the top floor, were invited to apply. She called it the glass table because she didn't just want people seated at the table, she wanted them to see clearly how decisions were made. Applicants flooded in. When a young manager from a satellite office emailed her and wrote, "Ma'am, I never thought someone like me could lead a billion-dollar project. Until I saw what happened last week. Amara smiled softly. This, to her, was the real success. Not defeating people like Gerald, but helping people like him learn. And helping everyone else rise up where they belonged. Gerald's fall quiet but final days later, Gerald appeared on a business talk show. He tried to smooth things over with a smile. Mergers are messy, he said. But no harm was ever intended. But the voice of the interviewer pushed back. Gerald, why weren't your shareholders informed about the control clause? He froze briefly. Mumbled a sentence. Changed the topic. But that clip spread. Investors lost trust. Confidence cracked. And in corporate rooms far from cameras, people whispered words he hadn't heard before: maybe it's time for someone else to lead. The final decision came on a Wednesday 2 weeks after the failed merger. A memo was released from CHRONICLES' boardroom. Effective immediately, Gerald Marx has stepped down as Chief Executive Officer. A new interim leader will be announced in the days to come. It wasn't shouted from the rooftops. But it didn't have to be. The empire he built on pride had quietly collapsed under the weight of someone else's character. A message without saying a word. Amara never commented publicly about Gerald. She never mentioned his name in interviews. She didn't take part in the media storm. Instead, when asked what happened at that historic meeting, she simply replied, "I did what I was supposed to. I paid attention. I asked a question. And I held firm to the values that led me here. No revenge. No personal attack. No celebration. Just leadership." Knowing where you belong. One morning, weeks after the shakeup settled, Amara entered a new meeting room. This time, it was a panel hosted by one of the top venture capital firms in the country. Billion-dollar minds filled the room. An executive at the door looked up and greeted her. "Ah, Miss Green. Right this way. Head seat is yours." She smiled and replied softly, "Thank you." As she walked through the room of new faces, no one questioned if she belonged. Because by now, the industry understood she didn't just belong in the room. She built the room for others to belong, too. The city's tallest hotel ballroom sparkled with soft golden light as the annual Global CEO Roundtable unfolded. It was an event people whispered about all year, not because of the cameras, but because of who got invited. Only 50 CEOs from around the world were handpicked for the closed-door meeting. These weren't the newsroom leaders. They were the architects of industries, the people who shaped the next decade of business behind elegant speeches and sharp smiles. And that evening, Amara Green walked through those glass doors, just like she had through many others. Calm. Unshaken. Graceful. This time, no one laughed. No one stared like she didn't belong. Because now, they all knew better. A different kind of power inside the ballroom. Amara's presence felt different, not forced, not questioned. She wasn't the first anymore. She was the one they hoped to talk to before the night ended. She was greeted with knowing nods, firm handshakes, and even quiet compliments. "You're calm in that merger meeting, unforgettable," one CEO said. "You handled it better than most in your seat would have," another admitted. Amara didn't take pride in Gerald's fall. She never spoke about it. But she noticed the way other leaders now carried themselves more carefully around her, less false charm, more truth. Because when integrity speaks clearly once, others begin to listen more quietly. An invitation within the room later that evening. A short, well-dressed woman stood near the edge of the room, observing Amara. She was Helen Ward, co-chair of the Global Tech Ethics Board, and one of the most respected voices in corporate leadership. When Amara walked by, Helen extended her hand. "I've followed your journey for the past year," she said warmly. "But what you did at that table, that was more than strategy. That was leadership with balance. We need that." Amara nodded with quiet focus. "Thank you. I believe leadership isn't proven once, it has to be renewed in every decision we make." Helen smiled. "That's exactly why I'd like to speak with you privately, not tonight, but soon. There's an initiative we're launching next quarter. Something important." She handed over a sealed envelope. "No one's signed on yet. If you choose this, you won't just sit at one table. You'll build a new one." The envelope read, "Private Briefing, Global Equity and Innovation Council, Chair Position Consideration." Between the lines, Amara returned to her hotel suite that night without speaking much. She set the envelope on the desk without opening it right away. Instead, she stood at the wide window overlooking the skyline, her reflection caught faintly in the glass. So many moments passed through her thoughts: the first time her name was skipped in a meeting. The first time someone asked her to bring coffee instead of her ideas. The first time she stood in a break room hiding tears because she had done the work, and still wasn't seen. But now, none of that hurt. Because she had never responded with noise. She had responded with clarity. And now, clarity was calling her forward. She opened the envelope. Read the terms. It wasn't just a seed. It was a structure. The leadership of a council that would guide ethical growth, funding opportunities, and corporate policy changes across hundreds of companies engaging in global business. And she had been chosen first. Before sending her response, Amara did something simple. She emailed her team. Not to inform them of the opportunity, but to ask, "Who on our mentorship program feels ready for more? I want 3 new leaders ready to rise. We are going to create space for more voices." Her assistant replied within 10 minutes with names. Young talent. Sharp minds. People who just needed room to be seen. Then Amara crafted her response to Helen Ward: "Yes, I accept the consideration. But only if this council will be a place where voices like mine are not the exception. I don't aim to be the first. I aim to make sure no one else has to be." The circle expands. A week later, headlines quietly confirmed it: Amara Green considered as chair for Global Equity Council. But to Amara, it wasn't the position that mattered. It was the platform. And the promise. She didn't climb corporate ladders just to look down. She climbed so she could reach back and pull others up with steady hands. A voice from the past. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her office. No return address. Inside, just a card: "To the woman I once told didn't belong. I didn't know I was speaking to someone who would soon carry rooms I could barely stand in. I lost my seat. You filled it with wisdom. Thank you for not becoming like me but becoming better. Signed only, G." Amara read it quietly. She folded it once. Put it in her drawer. And kept going. Because she wasn't driven by proving people wrong. She was driven by making things right. And now, she wasn't just heard in the room. She was helping build the future of the rooms themselves. Weeks had passed since the quiet announcement of Amara Green's nomination to chair the Global Equity and Innovation Council, and the tone of corporate leadership had clearly shifted. Meetings that once dismissed her presence now invited it. Leaders who spoke over her now leaned in to listen. But Amara didn't move through this new respect with pride. She moved through it with purpose. It had never been about fame. Never even about titles. For her, leadership was about impact, and impact meant building doors for those the world forgot to welcome. So, she began traveling not to large cities only, but to smaller offices, partner companies, workforce training centers. She asked questions like, whose voice hasn't been heard in 6 months, and what are we missing at the decision-making table? The media called it the Amara effect. But for Amara, it wasn't a strategy. It was responsibility. An email from another time. One quiet Friday morning, Amara sat at her desk going through emails. Her assistant, Rena, handed her a sealed envelope without a sender listed. "It was dropped off this morning," she said. Amara opened it. Inside was a simple, typed note with a name. Jordan Ellis. The name took the air from her lungs. Jordan had been her supervisor during the first job she ever held straight out of university, the man who regularly forgot to invite her to meetings, took credit for her ideas, and once told her during a review, "You're too reserved to be a leader." He had disappeared from her professional life more than a decade ago after a rough layoff during a corporate restructure. Now, the letter in her hand read, "Miss Green, I don't expect a reply or forgiveness. I just want to be honest. My career never recovered fully after I left the firm. I now work in a small consulting outlet, struggling to close contracts. Some days, I regret how I treated you. Other days, I regret that I didn't know better. I trained myself to see strength only when it looked familiar. And I never saw your strength then, but I see it now. If you can find it in you. I could use a small chance. No promises. Just an opportunity." Jordan Ellis. Amara held the paper in silence. It said so little. And yet, it said more than he ever said in 2 whole years she worked under him. The test of growth that day, Amara didn't give an answer. Instead, she went back to her normal rhythm, reviewing reports, checking on her mentorship program, preparing for the council's launch. But the letter stayed on the edge of her desk, like a quiet presence staring at her. What does it mean to lead, she thought, if you only support the voices that once supported you? And so, she scribbled a note. 1 sentence. Not as a gift, but as a test. She emailed Jordan and asked, "What value do you believe you can bring to the work we're doing here, not for me, but for those the system still doesn't see?" That was it. The answer that changed her silence. 3 days later, a reply came. Jordan's response wasn't long. But it was different than she remembered him ever being. "Miss Green, I spent years thinking I lost my job because the industry changed. Truth is, I never learned how to lift others, so I never became someone worth following. I understand now that leadership doesn't only look like big voices and firm hands, it sometimes looks like quiet presence and fierce care, like how you led. I can train. I can guide. But I promise you this, I will never again teach people to rise by stepping over someone else. My voice failed you once. I'd like to use it now to help others feel seen. If you'll let me." No begging. Just clarity. Amara read it twice. Then a third time. And then she glanced at a quote posted near her desk. Something her mother often told her: "Sometimes, mercy plants seeds justice cannot." Decision in quiet power. Amara forwarded the email to her team with a simple note: "Bring him in for a 3-month trial. No promises. Let his work speak." Her assistant blinked twice at the name. "Are you sure?" she asked. Amara smiled. "He asked for a chance, not a favor. Let's give him that chance, what I never got." And with that, Amara continued her day. Because strength doesn't hold grudges. Weeks later, Jordan started quietly. A consultant. Nothing flashy. He kept his head down, learned the new tools, coached younger team members. Never once asked to meet Amara face to face. But one day, passing in the corridor, she paused as they crossed paths. He stopped. She met his eyes. And without a smile or handshake, she said, "I hope you're proud of the work you're doing now." He nodded slowly. "I'm learning how to build, instead of just lead." She nodded back and walked past, not out of coldness, but because she didn't need to stay in the past. She had already done the most powerful thing a leader can do. She didn't copy those who doubted her. She chose to be better than the mirror they tried to hold up to her. News of Amara Green's rise was no longer a quiet conversation. Her picture was on the cover of magazines. Her words were quoted on business blogs. Her mentorship program, The Glass Table, had produced 17 new directors across companies in just 1 year. Her influence was inspiring young professionals. Investors were shifting focus toward firms with inclusive cultures. Media called it the Amara model. But not everyone shared the celebration. Behind closed doors of elite rooms, some began to whisper words wrapped in concern but driven by fear. "She's changing things too fast. She's playing favorites. She speaks too softly, but her name is everywhere." To others, she was a signal of hope. To them, she was a symbol of disruption. And those who once never saw her, could no longer ignore her. The letter meant to shake her. One Tuesday morning, Amara received a letter unsigned, but clearly sent with intention. It was written in professional tone but read like a veiled warning. "Your focus on mentorship and equity may be inspiring to some, but to others, they reflect a potential risk to standard values of leadership. We suggest a redirection toward more neutral practices before your strategy invites re-evaluation by higher boards." It wasn't officially threatening, but it was meant to rattle her. A less experienced version of Amara might have taken it to heart, started doubting her ways, wondering if she'd gone too far, become too visible, made too many bold moves. But not this version of her. Not the woman who had outlasted being ignored, laughed at, overlooked, and silenced all before she turned 40. She read the letter once. Then again. Then folded it and placed it in the same drawer where she kept Gerald's apology. She whispered quietly, "Strength never asks for approval." Whispers become headlines. By the end of the week, an anonymous article appeared online, titled, "Is Amara Green Too Powerful to Be Trusted?" The writer remained unnamed. The content? Half-true numbers, opinion disguised as concern, and words like uncomfortable leadership style and divisive programs. Social media exploded. Some called it jealousy. Others called it a wake-up call. But one thing was sure: the spotlight Amara had earned had now turned harsh and hot. Journalists asked for statements. News anchors debated her approach. Critics wrote threads about how leadership used to be stronger when it stayed quiet. The response that no one expected, and then, silence. No press conference. No tweet. No blog. People waited. And then finally, Amara's office announced a live stream, a small video shared online, not aired with drama, not hosted by major networks. It was just her alone, seated at her desk, calm like always. She looked directly into the camera and said, "I've heard the conversations. I've seen the articles. And I understand that change makes people uncomfortable. But if leadership should only feel safe for the people already seated, we don't need leaders, we need mirrors. I wasn't chosen to protect comfort. I was trusted to lead progress." Every chair I pull out, I do so not to disrespect the past but to build a table that wasn't there when I arrived. If that feels like a threat, then perhaps what we fear isn't me but a future we can no longer control. She ended with one simple line, I'm not here to fit in. I'm here to make space. The video went viral. Not because of anger, but because it carried a power many leaders had forgotten, power without ego. Courage without noise. Behind her, a quiet army gathers. Emails flooded her office. But they weren't complaints. They were thank you notes. Young employees. Women in mid-level leadership. Executives of color. Mothers balancing careers. Men who admitted they were finally learning how to lead with humility. One email caught her eye. It was written by the daughter of the janitor from her first office job. I remembered your name because you smiled at my dad every day. He always told us that one's going to go far. She sees people. Now I see your face on a screen, and I know he was right. Amara read it in silence, hand covering her mouth. She didn't cry. But inside her, something softened, the kind of warmth that tells you, maybe you're walking the hard road, but it's the right one. The boards reconsider. Meanwhile, the anonymous article backfired. 3 sponsors of the Global Equity Council reaffirmed their trust in Amara's direction. 2 of the programs she started began expansion into international structures. A vote was called within the very board that tried to warn her. When the dust settled, the individuals behind the article quietly stepped down. No drama. No legal battle. Just quiet acknowledgement that the tides had turned. And Amara? She didn't speak about any of it. Because when you walk with truth, you don't chase every shadow. She wasn't too powerful to be trusted. She was too grounded to be moved. She became, not the loudest voice, but the leader others began to echo. Amara Green stood at the edge of the rooftop garden above the Global Equity Council headquarters. The city stretched endlessly in front of her: tall buildings, crowded roads, lights still blinking in daylight. She didn't come up here often, but today was special. 2 years had passed since the day she'd received that first warning letter, the critique wrapped in concern, the threat hidden inside advice. Back then, some questioned if she belonged. Now, they followed the trail she left behind. She had become more than a CEO. She was now referred to across countries as a global voice for ethical leadership. But today, she didn't wear power like a crown. She wore it with humility. Because Amara never set out to be famous. She only wanted to make space where none was given. A school full of her name miles away, in the neighborhood where Amara once grew up, a school had recently been renamed. The Amara Green School for Leadership and Innovation. It sat on a quiet street, not far from the tiny house she had lived in as a child. The hallway walls were now painted with portraits of leaders from all backgrounds, women and men, young and old. And in the library sat a quote above the shelves: lead without fear. Build without pride. Create space for those walking behind you. Amara Green. She hadn't asked them to name the school after her. They did it after she anonymously funded full scholarships for 300 local girls in tech and business tracks. When asked by the board why she'd stayed silent, she simply answered, good leadership doesn't always need the spotlight, just a light to follow. A young woman with the same quiet fire. One afternoon, Amara was invited to guest teach a class at the school. In the back of the room sat a quiet girl named Lena, who reminded her of herself: soft-spoken, eyes sharp with thought, and a notebook filled with ideas she was too shy to share. After class, Lena approached slowly. Miss Green, did anyone ever listen to you when you were my age? Amara smiled gently. Not always. But I kept speaking anyway. And one day, the world ran out of reasons not to listen. Lena blinked with wonder. What if they never listened to me? Amara leaned down just slightly, never breaking eye contact. Then build something so strong, they can't ignore what you've made. The table that grew back in the city, the glass table, her mentorship program, had spread across 5 countries. It was no longer just a leadership pipeline, it was a movement. Companies were restructuring their hiring practices because of its success. Senior executives began mentoring juniors more intentionally. People who once felt unseen were now leading meetings, running departments, changing cultures. But Amara didn't lead it directly anymore. She had stepped back, choosing to guide, not command. Because her goal had never been to stay on top. It was to lift who was next. A message from someone long forgotten one day, a simple letter arrived, no fancy envelope, no return name on the outside. It was from Gerald Marks, the man who first laughed at her in that boardroom and asked if someone from HR had gotten lost. Now, long retired, Gerald wrote not to defend, but to confess. *, you didn't just end a career, you changed it. I thought I was the strongest voice until the day yours spoke with calm and cut through everything I had hidden behind *. I watched from the sidelines as you built something greater. And I've told my grandchildren stories not about my company, but about the woman who reminded the business world what real strength looks like. Thank you for never lowering yourself to match my actions. You saved more than a company. You helped save the parts of me that still wanted to believe in better. Amara folded the letter quietly and placed it in a wooden box beside her mother's photo next to the note from Jordan, and the first speech she gave as chair. All stories of people who once tried to quiet her but ended up being changed by her silence. And then she took her final seat years later. Amara stepped down as CEO. Not because she was tired, but because she believed in making room. She didn't retire into invisibility. She became a professor, a global advisor, and a builder of scholarship programs in 10 countries. Her story spread in textbooks and boardrooms not for some grand takeover, but because she walked with uncommon grace in rooms designed to push her out. And wherever people asked, "Who taught you how to lead like that?" someone always replied, "A woman named Amara Green." She once was told she didn't belong. So she built the space anyway. She didn't end careers from anger. She ended them with accountability through facts, fairness, and quiet truth. Her legacy wasn't revenge. It was renewal. And in a world that once doubted her place, she left a mark no nameplate could ever carry. Because she didn't just rise. She raised others too.